All right, we're back. We are WEBD6201 in the winter 2020 semester, and it's lesson 2. I just wanted to go over with you kind of a review of where we're at in a second. But first, let's just bring up our PowerPoint. So this week, we're going to kind of go over what we did last week. Last week, we did a course intro and course outline. That's what we kind of went over. I also talked about a little bit of how JavaScript enhances HTML. We talked about progressive enhancement and how that works. We did a little bit of JavaScript syntax, and we talked about this funky thing called an IIFE, an immediately invoked function expression, which is something that looks weird, but actually quite helpful. We also did an intro into the document object model, which we'll be reviewing today and adding some more commands tomorrow. We'll be talking about that. But today is going to be all around JavaScript events. We also did, we talked about a few installations. We did the VS Code, Visual Studio Code Editor. We installed that. We also did an installation for GitHub, Git and GitHub. We signed up for GitHub. And we also talked about our YouTube link, which is what you're watching right now. So kind of our course YouTube link. And a bunch of other installations. For example, Node.js, we went over that, how to install that. And we're using Node.js as a package manager for what we're doing in JavaScript. So that's what we're doing. Well, that's what we did last week. So this week, we're going to be talking about events and event handlers. But before we get there, I want to do a brief review about all the installation steps we kind of took last week. So again, this week we're going to talk about event handlers and how they work. And you can see here you have a sender, there's an event, and there's a listener. And then what's going to happen is the listener sends a trigger to the handler, and the handler handles the event. We're going to be talking about this today. Okay, let's talk about the installation steps we took last week. So last week we kind of installed, I'm going to start over, and we kind of installed a bunch of stuff on the command line, right? And I'm going to just start up a brand new folder, just like we did last week. So I'm going to start off from scratch. I'm just going to kind of do everything in one this time. So again, this will be WEBD6201. And this will be lesson 2B. You guys are the B team. And I'm going to bring this up for a second. And this is going to be our VS Code editor. I'm just going to drag and drop from my desktop to my VS Code editor, and which is going to bring up kind of a reference, or kind of my folder. Remember what VS Code does. VS Code is different than Visual Studio in that it has direct file access to the operating system. So this is actually looking at the operating system folder structure. So that's what we're going to be modifying. On that, I have to also say that I've also posted Lab 1, which is all around DOM manipulation. And if you follow this lesson, lesson 2, today and tomorrow, you should have everything you need to complete your Lab 1, which is going to be due next week on Friday at midnight. Okay, so that's the 24th at midnight. Let's get doing this, and how would I start? So again, when I start off my folder structure, and I'm talking about this, I would set up a bunch of folders. So here's my first folder. I'm going to set up an assets folder. I'm going to also set up, well, let's make some mistakes. Let me set up another folder called contents. And immediately after that, set up another folder called scripts. And sometimes you see this situation where you put your scripts folder somehow by accident inside of your content folder. You can literally just drag and drop that out, click move, and you can see now that they're separate. So we have these folders, that's our folder structure, as well as a new file called index.html. There's our index.html file. So we talked about this and how to set, this is our basic folder structure. Let's add some other files here before we modify our index.html. We add under content, we had a new file called app.css. That's our custom CSS file that we're going to be using for this project, as well as a new file called app.js. And app.js is going to be something we're going to be scripting in. And that's our script file. And then if we want assets to be pushed up to GitHub, which we're going to be using, and I'm going to be talking about GitHub at length tomorrow in tomorrow's class. Right click here, I'm going to add a new file called gitkeep. And gitkeep basically says that if we put this up, we'll put it up on GitHub and we'll be good to go. All right, so that is our folder structure, and this would satisfy one of the requirements for my lab 1. Okay, let's close these off for now. You can see that this is our folder structure. Now this is all empty, and this is nice, but we really haven't done much in terms of putting things into place. So let's talk about our index.html. So when we start off, remember we said that we want to have a basic HTML page, so we're going to say HTML:5, and then I'm going to press tab, and Emmet, see how it says Emmet abbreviation here, it's going to create this structure or template, if you will. And how do I do that? Well, if you go up on our week, so this is week 2, you can see that I've got a couple links. One is this GitHub education pack, which we'll be talking about a little bit, and then this, which is Emmet documentation. So if I actually click there, it'll take me to this link, which is showing me my abbreviation syntax. And you can see that how Emmet works is it gives me a quick hit abbreviation syntax to create a structure in my HTML. Again, why are we doing this? Well, this is not an HTML course, and this is not a CSS course. But we want to use HTML and CSS when we do JavaScript, so we have something to latch onto and modify. So that's what we're doing this for. Okay, so we need to use Emmet. So if I go back, so you can see I've used Emmet. Let me undo. You can always undo. And if you type the last character again and press tab or click this link here, it'll create the scaffold for you. So here's my scaffold. I want to rename this thing to WEBD6201, and that's lesson 2. That's what we're doing there. And we're also going to get a reference, and let's put some comments this time around. So this is our, this is our CSS section, right? Here's our CSS section. And you know what? Just to be clear, this is going to be where our script section is going to be, right? I'm just recording everything. I'm recording everything, right? So this is our script section, and if you want to hit the lights, then it'll be easier for you to see it. If you want to hit the lights, you can see it. Oh, you're good? Okay. So we got our CSS section and our script section, and again, last week what we did was we did all that installation, and this week what we're doing here is I'm just going through this whole thing again. Okay, so if you see in our CSS section, I'm going to press link, and then we're going to go to CSS, and then we're going to say that, here's our link, we're going to say that /contents and then app.css, so that kind of puts that into place. And we're also going to include a script source. Again, I'm just using Emmet really quickly. Script source to scaffold out our scripts, and then app.js. So now we've connected everything, but there's really nothing there. So we've kind of done this this step right here. And before I put any content into the body, I'm going to talk about some other installations we did. We also talked about Yarn last week, as well as NPM. And we're going to be using Yarn to download and install all of our requirements. But in order for me to do that, I'm just going to press Control backtick here. I'm going to bring up my little terminal, and I'm going to use yarn init. Yarn init basically creates a little package.json file which keeps track of all of our project dependencies. So now we're going to say WEBD6201. We're going to put this in lowercase for the name, and then it's going to be lesson 2b. Great. I'm just going to skip through this. The description is a demo project for WEBD6201 lesson 2. Okay, there we go. And our entry point, it says index.js. Really, we're going to put app.js, but it has no meaning in this context right now. Our URL we don't have yet. Author is me. So I'm going to put that in there if I can spell my name properly. There we go. We don't care about the license or that it's private, and then we've created the package.json file. So there it is. And the package.json file, remember JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation, that's what it is, and these are all properties that we have values for. So the blue that you see here in quotations are all properties. Think about them as variables, and these in this kind of an orangey color are all the values that are comma separated. That's what it is. So this is kind of defining an object. So we use the package.json file to keep track of all of our project dependencies, and that's what we did last week. Great. Let's go Control backtick again. I'm going to clear the screen. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say yarn add, and then start adding some packages. Now we did it separately last week, and this week just going to do it all in one. So I'm going to start off with jQuery, popper.js. We can do this all in one line. We can also include Bootstrap. And we can also include @FontAwesome/FontAwesome-free, and that's the free version of Font Awesome that we want to add in. So if I press enter, you can see here that it gets everything for me very quickly, as you can see. And now we also have this new folder called Node Modules, which is on the left-hand side. You can see that this folder is full, and I've got all my libraries downloaded. Again, this is not as efficient as something called a CDN, the Content Delivery Network, which would be just links to websites that host these files online, and the websites would be Microsoft, Google, what have you. Those are the websites that would be up there. Welcome. All right, so that is Node Modules, and then I'm going to clear the screen here. Once I've got the Node Modules downloaded, so I've got all these done, I can go into my index.html, and then I can install those things. I'm not sure if you had a chance to watch the videos from last week.
Yes, I watched the first one.
And the second one?
I didn't watch the second one. I was there for class.
Good. Okay. So again, we're going to talk about some stuff this week for next week, because maybe there's an opportunity for us to do things a little differently. But for now, we'll wait till after the recording's done, and we'll talk after class if you're okay with that. Yep. All right, so great. So let's do this. And I want to include two things, Bootstrap and Font Awesome. So I'm going to go to link. We're going to say CSS. And then in here, again, all I'm going to do is I'm going to do /node modules, and then it's going to be Bootstrap first, and then dist. I'm just going to close this off so you can see better. So dist / and then it's going to be CSS, and then bootstrap.min.css. So this is going to give us our Bootstrap CSS framework to make our page look nice. And then we're also going to include Font Awesome, just like before. We're just going to say /node modules, and then @Fort Awesome, and then Font Awesome free. And we're going to say that it is CSS, and we're going to use all.min.css. This is going to enable us to use all the fonts that are free, and it's just going to be literally a click and copy, right? Cooperation. So that is our CSS. And by the way, the things I'm doing, just a recap, is I'm just doing everything we did last week all in one blow, so you've seen it, one more time, and it's going to be recorded again. I'm recording live now. All right, so now that we've got this, I still need to enable some stuff, and usually what I do is in the script section, I'm going to put in another comment, and this is going to be third-party libraries. These are jQuery and all that stuff that we talked about, and also I'm going to have my own custom scripts. So we're going to say app scripts, that's stuff that we are going to make, right? So from a third-party libraries perspective, I'm just commenting, right? We can add our own, so it's going to be script source. Let's undo that. Source. See, typing errors, what they do. All right, and then /node modules, and then we're going to go to jQuery first, because we need that. jQuery dist, and jQuery min.js. So that's going to be for jQuery. We need jQuery because jQuery empowers Bootstrap. Without jQuery, Bootstrap doesn't work properly. So let's put in Bootstrap, script source, and then we're going to say /node modules, and then it's going to be Bootstrap, and then it's going to be dist, and then JS. And bootstrap.min.js. So this is going to give us everything we need. Notice I didn't include Popper. Popper gets included by Bootstrap by itself, right? So I don't have to do that change manually. And as you can see now, I have all the libraries and all the style sheets I need to get my, my code going. I'm also going to, last week what I did was I went up on Bootstrap, and I got examples of the nav bar, and I installed it in here. I'm going to do the same thing now. So again, I'm going to go to getbootstrap.com. There it is, getbootstrap.com. I'm going to go into my documentation. I'm going to go down into my components, and then under my components, I'm going to go into navbar, and you can see that there is an example navbar that I'm going to quickly cut and paste. So this one here, I'm going to copy it, right? And I'm going to go back and then just paste it in. I'm going to make a comment because this is going to be my main nav. So I'm going to put that in there, give a couple spaces, and just copy it in. Okay, The nav bar, it's cool, but it's not everything I want. And we can also test to see what's happening here. If I press Control backtick and just type in light-server, which we installed with npm, it's going to open up a brand new web page that's going to look like this. And we can see now that we have a very quickly scaffolded out nav bar, but it's white and doesn't have the proper links. This is just a template. Let's change the template so it's usable for us. So again, to do that, we're just going to change this from on line 15 from navbar light to navbar dark, background dark. We're also going to change the brand. We're going to call this WEBD6201. That's one thing we want to do. And we're also going to change the MR auto on line 22 to ML auto, which is going to move things margin left. So it's going to push everything to the right. I also don't care about a couple things when it comes to links. One thing I don't care about is the span tag. Let's get rid of the span tag of our home link. And I'm going to create that 5-page site that I talked about before. And so I'm going to be organized. I'm just going to take my anchor tag and put it over here, and my link tag, my list item tag, put it over here. And let's say this is the other link tag that we're going to be using. I'm going to be using this for a lot of the stuff we're doing. So this is going to be our other links. Things we don't need is all this drop-down stuff. So the drop-down, this nav item that's empty, as well as this form. Let's get rid of all that stuff. And now what we have is we have an interesting little template that we're going to use for our nav bar. Right? So we have our nav bar here, pretty straightforward. And what I want is to make this link something useful. So we're going to have a 5-page site. Home, products, services, about us, contact us. So products. And then we're just going to copy paste this one, just change the names. So we're just going to go services, about us, contact us. Again, I'm just going rocket speed here just to get us caught up. About us and contact us. And I'm not going to do this next week. This is just for this week, just to recap basically everything we did last week, and we'll do it really quickly. And a good thing is we're recording everything, so you can always go back and look at this recording. This will be recording number 3 in the row. And you can see what we're doing here. Okay, so we got this, and if I save it and go back, you can see now that I have a black nav bar with the proper links, but I don't have the funky icons. I want those icons back because they look nice and professional. So again, what we can do is we can go to the Font Awesome website. Here's my Font Awesome, and you can see it takes me right to icons because of my link. And here I want to use the home, but let's use another home instead of this boring one. Let's use the igloo. So if you look down, you can see there's an igloo. I'll use that one instead. We're in Canada right now, and it's pretty cold today, and it's going to snow tonight, by the way, too. Unfortunately, yeah, I know, right at 7 o'clock. Okay, so then we're going to copy that in, so you can see that's the I tag. So the I tag, because we have Font Awesome installed, right, this I tag basically tells Font Awesome that we're going to install an icon font called Igloo. That's what it does. And we need a space between the icon font and the text, so we're just going to add a space in there. And now let's add the other ones. For services, let's add that concierge bell. So again, I'm going to go to concierge. And you can see that there's a concierge bell. I want to use this thing for that. So again, I'm just going to copy this. You can see if I just click on it, it copies, go back, and I can paste it in, give a space. And then for about us, I'm just going to use info. So I want to say info. There's info circle, which is what I want to use. All the same stuff from last time, guys. No changes, right? So, all the same stuff we talked about. And then finally, contact us. We'll use a cell phone. I think it's cell phone alt, but let me just put it in self. And you can see that, oh wait, here it is, mobile alt. That's what it is. And I want to take that mobile alt. One day when it comes up, there it is. And then copy it and put it in here. Oops. There. So that's mobile alt. So that gives us everything. And if I go back out to our page, now you can see that I have some. Oh, that's weird. Did I put my igloo in the wrong place? I did. I put the igloo in front of products, not in front of home. Let me just copy that and put it in front of home instead. And then for products, maybe what we want is some kind of map. I think if I just put a map in there, it'll remember what I want. And if I go back now, you can see now there's a map. Okay, so there we go. So home, products, services, about us, and contact us, right? So that's kind of the stuff that we have. So this is kind of what we had last time. The only thing we're missing now is some kind of content, and I'm going to use a Jumbotron, which is kind of neat. It's going to give us this gray border in here. And let me show you what that looks like. So if I go back to Jump, you can see an example of a Jumbotron here on the Get Bootstrap website one day when this comes up. I like when it's cycling. And that always worries me when I'm recording, when I'm broadcasting live like this. It's pretty crazy. All right, so you can see that here is the Jumbotron. This is what I want, and there's an example of it right here. I'm just going to copy this. But before we put it in, we have to think about this as an area where our main nav is going to be. So you can see that in here, we're going to have another little comment. This is our main content, right? Underneath our main nav, we're going to have our main content, and we're going to call this main. And we're going to say main has a class of container. We're going to use the container class from Bootstrap, and we're going to give it also an ID of main content. All right, so we're going to say this is main content. Okay, it's a little different than what I did in the other class. Inside of that, we're going to have a div tag with a class of row. Inside of that, we're going to have a div tag with a class of column. And this is using Emmet again, that shorthand that I talked about last time. If I click on this thing, boom, it creates my scaffold, exactly what I want. And then what I can do is I can pop in that Jumbotron that I got from Bootstrap. All right, so there we go, hello world. And we don't need any of this stuff right now. I'm just going to kill all this stuff. So I don't want any of it in there, just the Jumbotron. And when I save and I go back and I come back out, you can see now that I have this hello world. Yay, right, really cool. Again, quick websites, Bootstrap, font awesome, makes our scaffold really quickly, all right? Questions around the setup from last time. So really, again, we used, wow, we did a lot of stuff. VS Code, we used Node, we used Bootstrap, Git, font awesome, Yarn, all this stuff we kind of put together. And like I said earlier, your lab 1 is already posted up on DC Connect, and you're going to see that it's due next week on Friday by midnight, all right, which gives you a chance to kind of go through this. What I've just done right now covers a lot of it. The structure of the page, I've asked you to put the structure of a page together. If you actually look at the details, I've asked you to create something simple like this, and then you're going to use JavaScript to manipulate this and add different features to the page. All right, so that is what we've done here. Okay, and for the most part, we're good. But now let's start doing our JavaScript coding. So this is the page part. If you just did this part alone, the structure of the page and HTML, this counts for 5 out of 21 marks on your lab. If you actually look at this, so just follow this exact thing. I mean, it's a lot of marks already, 5 out of 21. Let's get back to the JavaScript though. So I want to go to my JavaScript. Here's my JS file. And we talked about an IFI. We installed an IFI. Remember what an IFI is? I kind of mentioned it earlier. What's an IFI? It's might be on a test, right? So that's why I'm mentioning it again. What's an IFI? It immediately invoked function expression. Yeah, if you know that, then you're golden. That's like a thing to know. And of course, what does this mean, right? It means that it's like an anonymous self-executing function, kind of. That's what it is. And it's also a closure. It kind of encapsulates our files. And it looks like this, right? Oops. Right? It looks like this, kind of. There it is. And you can see here that anything I put inside this IFI is going to be preserved. So it's going to look nice. As well as it's going to not allow anything that I declare in here to escape into the global buffer in the web page. Remember that our web browser is going to go through and parse each line of my HTML code, and because my HTML code, you notice my HTML code, it's going to go through each line, and then every time it goes to a link or a script, it's going to take whatever's in this link and inject it at that position. It's going to put it right into line 8, as an example. And then it's going to inject the next one and the next one. So it's going to compile all the stuff that I've linked in here into one big script. That's what it's going to do. Same thing goes with these external scripts that we got for jQuery and Bootstrap, and then our script is going to be right last, right? So the page is going to go through here, it's going to get to our script, and then sometimes what happens is, things happen asynchronously, which means even though we're showing a particular order, the browser will trigger things in whatever order it feels like. So what we need to do in our app.js is not just do this, but also listen for the window to load. So we're going to say window.add event listener, and we're all about events today. So add event listener, our first listener is going to be the load event. And sorry for the code hinting here. And the load event needs to point to some kind of event handler. We're going to be talking about that in a second. We don't have it, but it's going to be called start. That's what I'm going to call it. Okay? And the start function, which is going to be up here, here's our start function. And our start function is going to be kind of like this, right? However, just to mention something, we can have different declaration styles for functions. Do we know all the different declarations? There's 3 different styles of declaring functions. Do you guys by chance know what they are? This is the first style, which is the keyword function and then the name. This is called a named function. Here's the second style. Let's suppose I have another function called main. I can say let main equal to an anonymous function. This is another style. Oops, if I can actually type properly today. There. This is the second style of declaring a function. So start and main, and I can call one function from another function, right? Just like this. Okay, and let's just make this happen, we'll use a console log. And in the console log, we'll have some special cases. We'll say %C. We're gonna style our output this time. %C. We're gonna say app started, right? And we're also going to call the style, our color is going to be blue, and our font dash size is going to be 20 pixels. That's something we can do actually, because our console is actually a mini little web page. That's what it does. Okay. So, and then when we get to main, we can say that console.log, do the same thing. %C is the style, and then we can say that. Actually, we do this properly. We can say that main app started. We know where that is. And we can say our color for this one is going to be green, and our font dash size is going to be like 16 pixels, a little bit smaller. Okay, so that's our console. And just to add some kind of a special effect, I'll just copy paste this. And instead of our main app started, let's put a little ASCII character, like a pipe character, that kind of shows this, right? And maybe what we'll do is this pipe character, we'll add some spacing. Watch this. To make it interesting, we'll add in a V, so like an arrow, right? That kind of shows main. You don't see it because it just looks like a pipe and an arrow and a V. But actually what's going to happen is on the console, if I type this, right? So a couple things are going to happen. So the JavaScript file is going to load. It's going to call this window event listener load. When the browser finishes loading, it's going to call the start function. The start function is going to display the console log. Then it's going to call the main function, this one. And then the main function is going to display 3 console logs. Let's see how that works. So if I right click and I go to inspect, you can see under the console that I have exactly that. And there's my little, take a look at that, there's my little arrow, right, to make it look like, hey, my app started, inside my app, my main app started. Take a look at that though. That is like, I got some coding. By the way, notice I can zoom in and out just of my console by pressing Control and using my scroll wheel, just here. Not here, just in here, in the console window. So you can actually have a expanded or a bigger console if you're blind like me. All right, so maybe that's not good. And remember how we talked about browser sync last week, where I can have 2 windows, 1 window here, and let's suppose I have a dual monitor set up at home somewhere. Obviously not here, because I have to have more real estate to do what I'm doing properly here. And I can set this up so they're side by side, right? And then when I change something here, it's going to change this automatically, right? So let's suppose it's not main app started, we'll call it main program started, right? And if I save that, you can see that immediately that changes. That's what the browser sync module is all about, right? And you can see that this is something that I'm doing and this is something else that I'm doing. All right, so that's kind of how JavaScript is functioning. So first the page loads, then it goes to start, and then from start it teleports into main, and then from there it does its business, right? And we talked about this. This is one way. We can also, instead of logs, we can also use, I'll give you some other examples. We can also use info, warn, and error. Let me show you what that looks like. So these are different options for console commands. Here's what they look like. So this is info, this is warn, and this is error. So you can actually produce different kinds of outputs on the console to give your application developer, if you're sharing your code with somebody else and it's an application programming interface, they can consume the code, and if they make a mistake, you can warn them on the console, right, with whatever thing you want to do, depending on the severity. But for the most part, we use log, right? Log is pretty good. All right, so that is our function. I'm going to just pop over to the PowerPoint because we're following a PowerPoint today. So today and tomorrow's lessons mostly are about JavaScript events. And by the way, event handling and event listening, that's a very common way we do things in many other programming languages. But this whole thing in a listener and a handler, it's back down to this idea of a design pattern. So again, maybe we talked about it last week, maybe we didn't. But there are 23 design patterns created by a group of programmers called the Gang of Four, actually. It's a thing, yeah. So 1990s, mid-1990s, these programmers came together and said, look, these patterns keep emerging when we code, right? And the Gang of Four made a book. Let's just go to that book for a second. So here is Design Patterns by the Gang of Four. There we go. And they made this book, Design Patterns, and it's actually a book that you can buy. It's pretty academic, so when you look at the book, it's kind of difficult to understand everything unless you're like, a computer scientist. I think that'd be the right way to say it. Some really cool stuff. There's also some examples of code and so on. But these guys kind of describe different design patterns, and one of them, I'm just going to use the Wikipedia, but there's other better resources there too. One of the design patterns. So there's three different types: creational, structural, and behavioral. And if you look through each of these types, so here's creational, abstract factory, builder, factory method, prototype, and these are only some of them. And then adapter, bridge, composite, these are just things that are called. But the one that we want is something called the observer pattern. And what the observer pattern is basically you have a couple of things here. I think there might be a diagram. You have something called the subject. Right? I'm just going to zoom in here so you guys can see that a little better in this diagram. I think it's a good diagram that they have up on Wikipedia this time around. So you have the subject, and notice that the subject is being viewed, right? And we have the observer, and the observer is observing the subject. That's what's happening. And what happens also is when you have the observer and the subject, as an example, you have a bunch of clients that subscribe to the observer. That's what they do. And you can't see that here. I wonder if they have another one. Oh, okay. Here's the subject, observer observes, but I wonder if they have the client one. Maybe they don't. They have some example code. I think this might be in C++ or in C#. This looks like C# code. Yeah, and this is Python. So what they have is, I'm just going to go back up here to the picture. What they have, this is part of it, but one of the things they also have is the subject that's being observed, the observer kind of can tell when something's happening to the subject. So I'm looking at something, right? And then there's a client, which is not drawn here, and the client subscribes to the observer, right? Maybe the observer has something called a list of subscribers. Subscriber list. And when the subject that the observer is observing does something that the observer is looking for, then the observer notifies every subscriber. So if I have a lot of subscribers, I just notify them all. Hey, I saw this happen. Then the subscriber has an opportunity to respond or react to what the observer has observed. That's how this is the observer pattern. And the observer pattern is used as a baseline for all events and event handling pretty much across the board. So going back to this little picture here, so we have the event, we have a source. Usually the source might be an element in our case, like for example a button. That's a good event kind of target, right? The button. And then we have the event that we're listening for, a click. Button, source, event, click. We have the click event, right? And then we have the listener. The listener is bound to the source, right, to listen for this type of event. And when the event is heard, so I generate the event by clicking the button, then it calls the event handler. And the event handler, what it's going to do, by the way, it's spelled handler. It's not right. But the event handler, what it does is it responds to the click. That's what happens. So there's two parts. It's like I'm sending a message. The listener listens for an event. The handler responds to the event. And that's what we see. That when we boil everything down, the things I just talked about, right, in JavaScript, that's the two things you want to hear about. And we have to kind of attach somehow. We have to attach the event listener to some kind of element. That's how it works. So then, going back to JavaScript as an example, let's go back to our code, right? And I'm going to make this bigger. This is an example of an event listener, and this is a named event handler. So start is a named event handler. This function here is the event handler for the load event. So again, the window is listening for the page to load. When the page finishes loading, and we can say different things here, it triggers the event. It raises the event. It detects the event. It senses the event, whatever, however you want to see it. Once the event is raised or triggered, then the event handler is called. It's also called the callback function, right? This is the callback function. And there's two ways. You can do it as a named function or inline, where you do an anonymous function in here. We're going to show the anonymous function right now. We're going to do that. But we need something to hook into. And now this takes us back to reviewing the DOM, the document object model. We need to kind of hook into something in the DOM in order for us to raise an event. Okay? So let's talk about this. Let's erase this. This is just for an example. We don't care about this main. And I'm not going to call main anymore. And notice how JavaScript really doesn't complain all that much. If I don't have main, oh well. It doesn't like put a squiggly or anything like that and say, main's missing. I don't know what you're trying to do, Tom. I'm trying to call main. But we do this. And then what I want to do here is I want to create an element. So here's what my target is. Here's my index.html. And you can see that I have my Jumbotron. And what I want to do after my h1 tag, and we kind of did this last week, I want to add a new element called an h2 element with a display of 2 class, display-2 class, and it's going to say my second heading. That's what it's going to be. That's going to be the text. Okay, so this is a challenge for you guys. How do I do that? How do I create an element, and how can I attach that element to the page? How is that possible? Do you remember? We kind of talked about it in lesson 2, in the second part of lesson 1. So maybe you didn't see that. Maybe you did, though. Do you remember how to do it? So we need to, first step is whenever we want to manipulate the DOM, any of the nodes that you see here, we have to hook into or get a reference to, like a pointer from C++, of the object we want to connect to. All right. So for example, we have a class Jumbotron, we have a class container, we have a main container as an example, right? And a main content. We need some kind of way of hooking into this div tag, right? Notice the class is Jumbotron, but maybe we want to, kind of talk about this div tag as something else. This time around, what I'm going to do is instead of using get element by ID, I'm going to get elements by class name. So I'm actually going to connect to this div tag. And by the way, do I have an extra div tag here? Div, this div tag, here, this div tag. Yeah, we have an extra, or maybe we don't. It's just misplaced. This should just be here. Let's just reorganize things so it looks right. Yeah, there we go. That's how it should look. So we have this Jumbotron, we have this column, row, this container, and this whole thing is main content. But I want to get into this part, which is going to be in our Jumbotron, right? So this is where we'll call it this. This will be our content area, and we'll use that as an ID. We can also use the class Jumbotron as a way of hooking in, but I'd prefer an ID. So let's just use an ID. We'll call it our text area or our content area. That's what we're just calling it here. Again, this is a little different than what we did in the first class. And this is a way you can hook into it different ways by some identifier, like a class or an ID. You can also hook into it by counting all the nodes, and we'll see that. I'll do a little bit of that tomorrow when we count the nodes, right? And what I want to do is I want to append an h2 tag after the h1 tag. So going back to code, then I want to say this. First, we need to create it. So I'm going to say let h2 equals to, and I want to get a reference. So document.getElementById, and it's going to be content area. That's what it's going to be. There's my content area. And now that I have an h2, I've connected to it. Actually, this is wrong. Let's call this, content area. That's what it is. And now that I've got my content area, I've got a reference to it, right? So this is, I'll document this. This is get a reference to the content area as an example. By the way, you got to get a reference in some way to whatever you want to connect to on the page. And then in here, after we get a reference to the content area, I want to create an h2 tag, or an h2, we'll call it an h2 element in this case. And the way to do that is let h2 equal to document.create element, and we're going to create a h2. Okay, so that creates it. Is it attached somehow to the main, to the content area there? Is it right now? Did I do anything to attach it? No. So even I can create any elements that I want in memory, and then I can attach them afterwards. So I want to create it and configure it. So I want to add an attribute of, and basically it's class attribute, that's what it is. Add a class attribute to the h2 tag, right? And that is h2.set attribute. That's one way of doing it. There's other ways too. Set attribute, and the attribute that I'm going to add in is called class, and the class name that I'm going to use is display-2, like I asked you guys to do. So that makes the element. This part configures the element. You can have several configuration steps. You might add color. You could add whatever else you want for the h2 tag. Okay, and then after I've added and configured it, I want to add it onto the content area. And the way to do that is you call the content area now. So now we append the new node to the content area. And the way to do that is say something like content area dot append child, and then the new node, which is h2. So this gets a reference, create it, configure it, add it. That's how it works. Make sense? Simple stuff. Okay, so let's see if this works. If I go back here, if I go back here, and if I go back to our content, you can see now, if we did everything correctly, that there is an h2 tag here. And as you can see, there's no h2 tag. What happened? And by the way, here's something else we want to see over here. Let's inspect and see, do we have an error? So what happened? We do it no error, right, as an example, and nothing happened. And this can happen sometimes. I probably missed something. So let's go through it and see what I missed. Okay, so I created an element. I went to the content area, and then I did this, but it didn't complain. It said content area is okay. What did I really call everything? Let's make sure that everything jives. So did I call it content area? I did. Does it have an ID? It does. I'm going to append something to the content area, right? I will. And is my my server still running? It is. Now, these are all things to check. Let me just rejig my server to make sure that that's not the issue. So again, light-server. Typically it's not. And you can see that it's not because I'm getting the exact same results. There's my results, right? And yet, if I go back into inspect, in my console I see nothing. In my elements, let's see what I see in my elements. Do I actually see that? I do. Look, there's my thing, but I see it did what it's supposed to do, but one thing I forgot to configure is the text content. I didn't put anything there. Let's go back. So if I go back into my JS, you can see that I missed my text content. Let's put that in there. So h2.textContent. By the way, you can also put inner HTML if you want to. I'm not going to put inner HTML. That also works. For me, the text content is going to be just a string that says a secondary header. Right? And if I do that, you can see now that the secondary header is like bigger than the other header. It's massive. Right? I'm using a display 2. Display 2 is bigger than a display 4. Display 2 is like an H2, but in Bootstrap language, display 2 makes it massive, right? So if you want it smaller, you're going to go with a display 6. Let's see if that works. And if I do that, you can see now that's a secondary header that's smaller, display 6. That changed. Cool. So we got hello world and some secondary header. Hello worlds are H1. Okay. Challenge for you guys. I want to create an event handler so that when I click on my secondary header, it changes color to blue. How do I do that? Click onto it, changes color to blue. And I want to use an inline event handler, not a named event handler. An anonymous inline event handler. How should I code this? What do you think? Without seeing it. And again, there's PowerPoints online. It will give you support if you want to do this. How would I do this? Any idea? Let's go back to the code. So what do I put in here to, remember we talked about the 3 steps. I have to have some element. I have to attach an event listener. I have to have an event handler. So I want to obviously attach the event listener to my H2 tag. So how would I do that? Well, what am I going to do? What would I type? H2, right? So I'm going to hook into this thing, dot, add event listener. So this basically says, hey, I'm going to add an event listener to this particular element. That's what I'm doing. So I have an element, that's the source. I have some kind of event listener, and I'm listening for a specific event. What specific event am I listening for? The click event. So I can put click. And then I want to make this case, I don't want to use the named function. Named functions are great if I'm going to repeat something over and over again. But if I'm going to only do it ever once, then a lot of times it behooves us to make an anonymous inline event handler, like this. Function, and then curly braces. This is an anonymous inline event handler, and you're going to see a lot of examples online that look just like this. Okay? So here we want to respond to the click event, and I want to take my H2 and change the style.color, right? I want to make that into blue. Blue. And if I did this, on click, it's going to change the style of my H2 tag to blue. Okay, let's see if that works. So click onto it, boom, it changed to blue, right? One problem is it doesn't change back. Once it's changed forever. Why? There's nothing to change it back. I haven't created an event that I can click on it again and something's going to happen. And one thing I could do is I could have some kind of flag, right? Is it blue? If it's already blue, make it black. If it's black, make it blue, right? So I could have a Boolean that tells me that that's the case, right? Here's something, do you think I can read the H2 style color? Is this both this color, is it both a getter and a setter? And if you notice, it says color string. It's a string, so it holds a color, which means I can compare it. And if I can compare it, I can change it. Here's how it goes. I want to do it all in one line. I didn't do this on last week's or the first section, but I want to do it with you guys, right? So how would this work? So I want to do it so that way I can toggle the effect. I can go from blue to black to blue to black. Every time I click it, it's going to do something else. How do I do that? So let's just wipe this out for a second. We know H2 style color is the thing we have to do, right? But we're going to say something like this. H2.style.color is equal to, and now we're going to do a little if statement, but we're going to do almost like a conditional statement in here. And it's going to look like this. If H2.style.color, right, is equal to blue, right? If that's true, then I want to make my color black. Otherwise, make it blue. Okay, have you seen this before? You should have seen it in C++, C#, and in Java. What is this syntax called? A one-line if-else statement. What is it called? Do you know what it is? Ternary operator is what it's called. Absolutely. It's called the ternary operator. And what this allows us to do is say this. This is how this works. It says, okay, I want to assign a string to the color, but I don't know which one I'm going to assign. It could be either black or blue. I don't know which one. But it really depends on what color the style already has. Is it blue? If it's blue, then assign black. If it's not blue, then assign blue. That's what it does. And this question mark says, if it's then, if it's true, do this. If it's false, do this. So the question mark is for true, and the colon is for false. Okay? So a one-liner that does kind of a toggle, and let's check it and see if it works. So again, if I click onto it, it makes it blue. If I click onto it again, it makes it black. And if I keep going there back and forth, it'll toggle on and off, which is kind of a simple effect. Okay? That is an event listener. This way I don't have to have two event listeners. I don't have to have a click. I don't have to hold a Boolean like to check to see, okay, it's, my H2 is blue. Some kind of like another Boolean, like let H2 blue, equals to false, and then do all that stuff. That's too much work. This kind of does it all at once because color holds value, and I can test for what the value is and then toggle it. That's what this does. So that's an example of the click. But there's other types of events. There's tons of events that you can use, and some of them are a mouse over and a mouse out. Very common events. Mouse over and mouse out, as an example, are some kind of events that we see all the time. Okay, so let's try those ones. So I could do something like this. I could say H2, add event listener, and this time I'll do a mouse over. And for my mouse over event, let's make it anonymous, self-executing, or anonymous function like this. It's not self-executing. And the mouse over event, I'm going to change the couple things. The H2 color, when I mouse over, that's going to be green, right? Let's just say. But you know what? I want to, when I mouse out, it's going to go back to black. So let's just do that. Let's go to, let's also make the opposite event, which is the mouse out event. So we're going to make another event called mouse out. Again, I'm not making these up. These are named events that are part of JavaScript, and we're going to talk about different kinds of events. When you go mouse out, we want to make this black again. All right, so let's try this event. Mouse over, green, mouse out, black. Okay? And this is interesting. Will it ever go blue? Will this blue ever work again? Think about this now. I got a click event. When I click onto it, and if it's already black, it goes to blue. If it's blue, it goes to black, right? But then when I mouse over, it's green. And when I leave, it's black. That's weird, right? Let's see how that works. So mouse over, mouse out. Mouse over, mouse out. Mouse over, click, mouse out. Mouse over, click, click, mouse out. Can't tell that the mouse out worked because it's both black, right? But these all work. Notice I used 3 different event handlers or event listeners. They're listening for different kinds of events. They're listening for a click event, a mouse over event, and a mouse out event. Those are the 3 types of events that they're listening for. Mouse over, mouse out. That's what I'm listening for. Interesting. Nice. And I can have as many events as possible. In fact, I could have the same event registered over and over again. I can have another click, on the same element. So why would I want that? Because then I could separate different kinds of effects into different functions if I really want to. Sometimes it solves a problem that way. And remember, this all works to solve a problem. Now remember, this is a anonymous function, right? But I can convert these anonymous functions into named functions if I want instead of this. And you know what? You're going to get in some weird funkiness. Take a look at this. You've got a function. Inside the function, you have a function. Inside these functions, you have a bunch of other functions. And when you look at this, when people start looking at JavaScript, they're like, wait, function hell, right? Like function within a function within a function within a function. And they don't know what that means, right? But that's the basic thing of JavaScript. JavaScript allows you to put a function within a function within a function. In fact, functions themselves are almost like little objects. That's what they are, right, in JavaScript. So I can definitely do these. I can also change this. There's one more style of function that I can define. I define two different styles. Let function name is equal to anonymous function. That's one way. This named function where function start. And then there's a third one. Here's a third one. I'm going to make another function. Okay, we'll call it main again. So again, remember I did this. I said let main is equal to function. That's a thing. I can do this, right? But I can also do this. With ES6, I can do something that looks like this. That's a thing too. And that's the same as function to mostly. That's what this does, right? Let main is equal to this. But this is called a lambda expression or an arrow function. A fat arrow function is what this is. And so if I can do this with a function like this, I can also do that here like this. I can say replace that with an arrow function that looks like this. All right? So I can do that. That's perfectly valid. So why? Yeah? What's the point of having so many ways is the question. And the answer is every way that we've talked about, I've shown you, solves different problems. That's what it is, right? So this actually carries forward its scope, right? And what I can do in here, this little function here, is it minimizes, I don't need the function keyword. That's one thing I don't need. And I can kind of get a return right away. Right, that's what it does. It's a lambda function, so I can do something with it immediately. Functions also have return types in JavaScript. You can return something from a function. One thing that JavaScript doesn't have, and we're going to talk more about this tomorrow, is it's loosely typed, right? JavaScript doesn't have a lot of types. Well, it does have types, but we don't declare the types explicitly. We declare them implicitly. If I assign something to JavaScript, then that type that I've assigned things to becomes that type. For example, if I assign a string to a variable, now it's a string type. If I assign something else to that variable later on in JavaScript, now it becomes some other type. And that drives developers crazy because we're not used to that at all. For us, we want the variable to have only one type for its lifetime. That's the way we operate as developers. But JavaScript is more flexible, some may say. And it allows you to do different things, and it's there for a reason. When it was created back in the day, JavaScript was very, very well thought out. And they made it so it's a very quick, flexible language that doesn't matter what type you assign to it, it'll accept it. Whether it's a Boolean, or whether it's a number, these are the types. Or whether it's a string, or whether it's something else, right? Array, like a list type, or whatever, doesn't matter. It'll take it all. Right? All right, so that is kind of event listeners and event handlers in a nutshell. Let's take a look and see what other types of event listeners and event handlers we can use. So if I look up online, and if I look for event listeners, if I say, I'll say JavaScript event types, there we go. And if I scroll down to the event reference, and you can see here there's tons of types. There's like error, abort, load. These are for resource events. Network events, online and offline. Focus events, focus and blur. Right? We're going to be talking about forms a little bit next week. Again, we're a little bit behind, but I want to make sure that you guys got all this stuff before we move on. Different kinds of WebSocket events. If we ever did kind of networking between two computers, we could use WebSocket events. Session events, CSS kind of animation events, and so on. And not all events, are contextual for every element. So if I try to do like a reset event on a H2 element, it would be ineffective. It wouldn't work. It wouldn't know what this is because there is no reset event for an H2 element, right? It's a form event. Same thing with printing events and composition events, different kinds of view events. For example, if I changed my view size, if I resized my view, made it bigger or smaller, if I scrolled up or down, it creates an event, right? Lots and lots of different kinds of events. Cut and copy paste, I key down and key press. We're going to use these kinds of events to detect key presses, right? Especially when it comes to forms. And many, many other. These ones are mouse events. Click. A context menu, if I right click, right? If I double click, mouse down, mouse leave. We did mouse over and mouse out. These ones are very common, as well as other ones. And then drag and drop events, we can do that, and so on. Tons and tons of them. So because there's so many types of events, right? You know, you don't have to remember all of them. You just have to know the ones that you need at the time. You can always look them up like this. Again, this is the event reference. I'll put this up on DC Connect, so you guys have that. So we'll say that, and I'll put it up on the other. I didn't do this for the other group, but I will. So we can say this is the event reference, event type reference. Right, this is pretty good. There we go. So that'll give us that. And you want that because basically there's all kinds of events, and you want to know what they pertain to. Okay. So example, if I ask you when I move the scroll wheel, instead of letting me move the scroll wheel only 1 pixel or 5 pixels, I want you to hijack my scroll wheel and move it down 50 pixels, 100 pixels. People don't like that kind of stuff, eh? When you hijack your scroll wheel and all of a sudden you see a big, you go down a lot, or when you scroll up you do something else. People don't like that thing. It used to be a thing though. Like, I don't know if you ever go to some websites, you scroll down and all of a sudden no, you ever do that? There's a bunch of stuff that pops up when you scroll down. Yeah, it can do that, and you can do that by using JavaScript events. So you can also do JavaScript events for the URL. So the document, there's a bunch of stuff on the document. One of the things that you can do in the URL is if the URL changes somehow, that's an event, right? So you can detect the URL changing because the page itself, right? It's event driven. So all browsers can detect the URL changing or you touching the URL. And you could prevent default behavior. For example, even though you're typing in a new address, once you go to my website, you're not really going anywhere. You're under my control. I can prevent you from moving anywhere else if I want, unless you reload the page, right? So there's lots of stuff that you can do with events. They can be pretty tricky. And that's how pop-ups work as well. When you click on something and you go to a page, it generates a pop-up because the web page itself is triggering JavaScript. When the page loads, load event, it triggers a pop-up. It pops up another page. It drives you crazy, right? So it stops that kind of stuff from happening. You can use something like uBlock Origin to stop pop-ups from happening. I have it loaded here on my browser. I recommend something like that to prevent pop-ups. But that's all event-based stuff. So going back. So we talked about events, but let's make some of these events. So this is one way of doing it. You can do it inline. You can use something called a fat arrow function. We're gonna go over fat arrow functions when we talk about ECMAScript 6, which is a kind of a newer version of JavaScript in the coming weeks. Okay, so let's put this back to function for a second. But let's make these functions, instead of being anonymous functions like this, let's make 2 named functions, one called mouse over and one called mouse out. Now here's something I could do. I could make a function within a function. I could do that. But that, my friends, is really ugly. And for most developers, they don't like, do you ever see like a class within another class in Java? It's called an inner class, right? I don't know. I'm not a big fan of inner classes. Why have inner classes at all? Why not just have objects or singletons or something? Doesn't make any sense to me. Anyways, they solve problems, especially when you program an Android application. You have some inner classes that run. All right, but here I want to make 2 events of the event handlers. Actually, I'll comment them first. So these are event handlers that I'm going to create. The first one is going to be a named event handler called mouse over. And the next one is going to be a named event handler called mouse out. Right? So now we're using named event handlers instead of anonymous event handlers. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here and just cut this stuff and put it into its appropriate places. So mouse over, it turns green. Mouse out, right? It's going to go black. There we go. Green, black. And let's, instead of it going to this anonymous function, let's do it so that it's going to go to mouse over. And this one here is going to look at mouse out. though. Okay? That is a valid way of doing it as well. So you can see that I'm listening to 2 events, but I have 2 named functions this time that it's accessing. Take a look, right? Okay, curious. What do you think? Do you think I'm going to be able to do this? Is there anything, any error that you can see that might occur when I do this? I want you to think about, look at my code. So here's my event listeners, mouse over, mouse out. And here's my event handlers, mouse over, mouse out. Should I have any error? What do you think? It's actually a little bit of a trick question. The answer is I will have an error. And let's see what the error is. Let's see if you can detect what the error is. So it looks the same, but however, we missed something. If I go back out to my page, you can see that when I hover over and when I hover out, it doesn't work anymore. See? It doesn't work. Clicking works because that's the same as what I had before. That works. But let's take a look at what it tells us in the inspector. So in the inspector, if I go to console, it says, hey, uncaught reference error, H2 is not defined. But of course H2 is not defined. We've defined it down here, right, in this scope here. We never defined it in the global scope. So therefore, it doesn't exist in mouse over and mouse out in this particular case. This is a good reason, another good reason why we use inline event handlers. Remember that scope cascades. If I'm inside of a scope, and inside that scope, and usually when I think about a scope, I think about anything that has curly braces. So for example, start, this is start scope from line 17 to about line 39. That's start scope, right? So in start scope, I define H2, right? So that lives and dies in this scope. But because these 2 anonymous event handlers were here inside of start scope, well, it cascaded into this mouse over scope and mouse out scope, right? It cascaded. But now, because I've removed them and I put them up here, there's no context. So it doesn't know about H2. Here's something that we can do. I can declare H2 up here, right, inside of our IFE scope, or our main function scope, if you will. I can say that let H2. And I can go down, scroll down to this, and get rid of this let statement right here. And all I'm doing here is I'm configuring, I'm creating an element, but the H2 has already been created up here, right? So now, remember we talked about that cascade. Because I'm in this scope, and because these things are in the same scope, for example, let H2, that line is on line 5, is on the same level as these functions. Therefore, H2 exists in these functions as well, right? But because it was declared in start, that was inside of here in this scope, it wasn't working. Okay, wait. So now if I run this, if I save it, and this I'm going to talk about why we're using let. Remember we talked about let, and I said never use var. And we're going to see why now. So here, now everything works. If I hover over, hover out, and I click, everything works okay, right? All right. Okay. All right. Watch this. Let's get rid of let. Let's just comment it out for a second. If I comment let out, and if I go down to H2, and let's just put it back, but let's put it back as a var instead of a let. And I press save. And let me go back to this. No error. In fact, it still works, kind of, until I do this. There's a reason for this, though. There's a reason for this. So I declared var in here, right, as an example, and yet these don't know what that H2 is. But what if I took these functions here like this, and I kind of pulled it out down here? Kind of did one of these. Is that good enough? Is that going to stop me from doing this kind of event? And if you notice, if I go back, save it, and if I go here, it's going to give me errors. That's still going to be the case. So this is the only time that happens, and I'll tell you why. Because event listeners create a special binding, right, that makes this area here a different context. All right? However, if I put this back, and let's suppose I leave it here and I leave this here, what's going to happen now? The answer should be nothing, because it doesn't know which one to take. So which one should it take? Should it take the H2 here, or should it take the H2 in here? What do you think is going to happen? This one. Yeah, because H2 is hidden. Even if I'm using var, it's hidden in there. And if I go back, you can see that if I hover over, it doesn't know what's happening. It doesn't know what's going on. There's no element that we're connecting to. But if I remove this this var statement and I press save and I go back, and if I hover over, now we're back to normal again. Okay? So that's something we can do. What about, we're talking about scope for a second, and I know it's kind of off topic, and we're not talking about functions yet. But can we do something like this? Can I do this? And can I do something like let my variable equal to my variable? Am I allowed to do this? There's nothing. There's no function. There's just curly braces. Am I allowed to do that? Can you do it in C++? Yes. Can you do it in C#? Yes. Can you do it in Java? I don't know about Java, but definitely C# and in C++, you can totally do this. Why would you want to do this? If I want to work with something that I want to kind of do some kind of operation in here that's inline, it's not a function, and I want to create variables and delete them after I'm done, right? So kind of like temporary section that I do something. I manipulate something, right? So curious, can I do a console log here, right? Do I have access to my variable, my variable? Do I have access to that somewhere here? Let's do a console log in my start and console.log. And inside my console log, let's put in my variable. I mean, it shows my variable, but can I do this if my let statement is there? Can I do that kind of thing? And if I go back, you can see I get a referencer immediately. My variable, not defined. What if I made this a var, though? So var, my variable, save, and now my variable is good. Look at that. My variable is OK now, right? But wait, it's inside this little curly brace thing. How can my variable be OK, but it wasn't a moment ago, right? Because before it was a let. How about const? That's another thing we can do. We can use const. Const my variable, and then I'm in here, right? And if I press save, you can see now I've got an error, right? So const, that also preserves the location. But var, What var does is it does something called hoisting. It takes this and moves it to the top of the function, right? Okay, how about if I wrapped it in a function? Let's say if I took var and I wrapped it in a function like this. Function, my function. My function. What if I did this? Is this var available now, right? My variable. Is this available here? And if I go back, no. The answer is not. When I'm in a function, that's why this iffy stuff works more or less. When I'm in a function, we're good. It preserves, it creates a closure. But if I'm just doing this, that doesn't do anything. But if I use let, that's OK. Right? I'm just pointing this out because we're talking about variables and functions and scopes. The other thing you might see is if I do a for loop. So if I do a for loop out here, so for, so in the regular space, for, var I is equal to 0 and I is less than 10, I plus plus, standard, for loop that we can do. And then what I want to do is I want to do a, I don't know. Well, I'm not going to do anything. Let's say a console log. I'm going to print I. Okay? So if I did that here, and if I go out again, you can see that I printed I. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, cool. So I can do that for the for loop. And then in here, do I have access to I? In here, should I have access to I? Well, I did a for loop, right? And I used var. Do I have access to I now in here, from over here? Shouldn't I die in here? Right? I gets created here, used, and it should die here, yeah? No, it doesn't. It doesn't die, right? So even though I did this, let's just comment this out for a second. So if I do this, I is less than 0, and then I goes to 10, then this should be 10, right? You can see now 10 is there. It's bad. What if I make this a let? Let I, right? And if you notice, that doesn't work, right? So this is really great. So let, and whenever you use var, that's what I'm saying to you, never use var. var is unpredictable what it's going to do. It's going to leak its variable all over the place. That's what we don't want. So we never use var for that reason. Let is good, const is OK, but var not. OK? Just letting you know that that's a thing that can happen in JavaScript, which we don't want to do. So we talked about these functions. I have these named functions. Let's put them down here. It doesn't matter the order. Let me just put them back at the top where I had them before, so you can see them a little bit easier. There we go, back at the top. Just going to clean this up a little bit. There we go. Okay, so back at the top, I have these two functions. I can do more than one thing, obviously. They're functions. Let's do some other things. I can do, when I mouse over, I want to make it so that my style font size is bigger, right? I want to make it bigger. So h2.style.font size. I want to make that equal to 20 pixels. And let's see what that does. So if I do that, so I mouse over, I want to make my font size 20 pixels. By the way, notice that I didn't get any code hinting. Why is that? Because I never defined what that is. If I hover over, it says my type is any. What the heck? Why is my type any up here now? It wasn't any before. Why is it any now? Well, because I haven't assigned it. If I don't assign a type, then JavaScript defaults to the any type. And this is bad, guys, again, for developers, right? We don't want JavaScript's types to be any. We want JavaScript's types to be something, Boolean, an HTML element. You know, it'd be nice if this type was a type of HTML element. We can kind of do this, right? It'd be nice if we could type it, you know, JavaScript, but we can't. This doesn't apply, and it says types can only be used in a TS file. What the heck is a TS file? We're going to get there in a second. For now, if we just do this, you can see that there's no type. And that's why we're not getting any code hinting, because it doesn't know what H2 is. It'll accept this because it won't complain. JavaScript doesn't complain. That's a problem. And also a good thing, right? It's a good thing. It's not going to give you curly braces, little underscores, right? But at the same time, it's not complaining. So if I have an error, oh well. I have to know that it's an error myself. And for debugging purposes, that's really hard. So if I go back, you can see now that if I hover over, it goes lower, right? But when I go out, it doesn't go back, right? That's 20 pixels. Let's make that really big. Let's make that like 80 pixels. So we'll do the opposite. So when I go over, it'll be really big, right? And when I go out, it'll be small again. So if I go out, right, I could change it back to something reasonable. So h2 dot style dot font size. And I don't know what display 2 or display 6 gives you. I can look it up, but let's suppose that it's something like, I don't know, 40 pixels. I think it's something like that. Let me see. It might be 40 or 30. So again, out. Let's see if that's right. No, it's even smaller. So it might be something like 30 pixels. Let's see if that's right. So something, 30 something. I don't know what it is. 34, 32. Let's see if that's right again. If I refresh. Yeah, 32 pixels. So if I hover over, take a look at this, right? Hover over, I get it really big, and I hover out, it goes small. So I can do a lot of little events based on my event listeners to do different things. I can change the color, I can change the size, I can change the style. You know, I can do I can make it spin, I can make it animate, you know, lots of things, right? And I can do this all with a mouse over and a mouse out event. Okay, guys, with any kind of events, you can attach any events to anything that makes sense. That's why we're showing this. Hey, back to this idea of an H2. What the heck is this any type? And what is TS file? Well, back when Microsoft was looking at JavaScript, they said, you know what? Wouldn't it be nice if JavaScript was easier? Wouldn't it be nice if JavaScript was friendlier for developers? And what they did was they developed another language called Typescript. Let's go to typescriptlang.org for me. Go there with me. And if you notice, TypeScript makes JavaScript easier. TypeScript is JavaScript's like an extended version of JavaScript. ECMAScript 6, this is the latest version of JavaScript, or ECMAScript 2020 now. That's coming up, the new version of JavaScript. It has more features than the old version of JavaScript, ECMAScript 2015. In fact, it was called ES3. That was the older version back in the early 2000s. ES5 was the modern version that came out with HTML5 and CSS3. Then they came out with ES6 in 2015, ECMAScript 6, or ECMAScript 2015. They started using the year number to describe the version of JavaScript. So there's ECMAScript 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, and now 2020. Okay? So a bunch of different versions. Each version adds additional functionality to JavaScript. So JavaScript is an evolving language that we talked about earlier. If I go to my playground for a second to show you what this looks like, let's suppose that this is my TypeScript playground. Let's suppose that I want to add a type. I can say that h2 is of type HTML element. And if I did this, and if I press home, let h2 is an HTML element, notice that in TypeScript, it accepts this. It knows that h2 now, if I hover over, is an HTML element. But on the JavaScript side, this is the translation of TypeScript. By the way, TypeScript doesn't work in browsers. TypeScript needs to be compiled and translated. So translated and then compiled into JavaScript. But we can't call it that. So some developer came out there and said, we should call it transpile, right? Translate and compile, transpile, right? And actually, when you go from one language to the other now, it's a common saying. We transpile from X language to Y language, whatever it is. So in order for us to make TypeScript work, we'd have to transpile from TypeScript on the left to JavaScript on the right. Notice it uses this thing called use strict. Does anyone know? You guys know what that means, use strict? Well, remember what I can do with JavaScript. JavaScript is a finicky language, right? I can assign a value to a variable without ever using the let, var, or const keyword. I can do that. I can say like h2 is equal to something. If I use strict, it'll prevent that from happening. It'll start complaining. It'll say, no. Tom, you need a let, a var, or a const, or else it's not going to work. Right? So we should always use, in our regular JavaScript, use strict. Let's do that. Let's take this use strict and let's put it at the top of our file. This is outside of the IFI. Remember, it's IFI scope. You can put use strict anywhere. You can use strict in part of your file and not in other parts of your file. But here I want to use strict all the time because it's going to help us with code hinting. So use strict is something we're going to always use. But here you can see that I've defined a type, and what TypeScript allows us to do, and this is just a quick sneak peek at TypeScript. We're going to talk maybe about TypeScript at the end of the course, near the end, which I think is a good segue into modern JavaScript development. By the way, TypeScript I've used to make games, full games, right, with TypeScript that have full animation and interaction, and I think it's the right way to go. So the way you can do it is, imagine if in other languages I want to make a class. Maybe I'm going to make a class that looks like person, right? I can do that. So this is on the left, this is TypeScript. Okay, so class person, and inside my class person I have a constructor function, and my constructor function is going to take two things: a public name, which is a string, and a public age, which is a number, right? So notice what I'm doing here: public name, string, public age, number, right? And if I hover over, right now it's not working because I don't have any curly braces. That's why it's giving me this red underline. If I go do this, all of a sudden it creates the structure that's compatible with JavaScript on the right. Guys, this is kind of a cheat, right? I mean, if I want to know how to do classes, I mean, literally I can go into TypeScript, type a class definition here, and boom, it'll work 100% in ECMAScript 6, which is your version of JavaScript that you're using right now, right here. And what I can do with this is, let's suppose I have a person, and let's suppose the person is going to say hello. So person says hello. So it says hello. It's going to return, my return type is going to be void. I can do that, right? And my says hello function, I can use console log, console.log, and I can use backticks. That's the way to do it. And I can do something like, kind of slash, I believe it's curly braces, or is it this? I have to remember now. But basically what you can do with it is you can interpolate, right, the name. So my name, I think it's this. No. I think it is curly braces name, right? Because that's the my name says hello. So it says hello, right? And I believe how this. Let me just make sure that that's the way it is. Sorry, it's been a while. ES6 string interpolation, and you're going to see what that is. There's template literals, what it's called. And I want to make sure that we're in the right place. I want to show you what that looks like. I use backtick characters for this, like it says. And one day, when my computer spins, you'll see what it does. But I want to show you the translation. That's why I'm showing this. I'm showing you like how you inject a type, right? And I'll wait for that to be done. For now, let's suppose it's going to do a console log here. Notice there's a console log over there. So it says hello is a function. And if I want to implement a person, I can just say that, well, person, Tom, is equal to a new person. And I need two things. I need a name, Tom, and an age. I'm going to put a fake age, 30, right? I'm not 30. And then if I say that Tom dot says hello, you know, then that's going to work just fine. Now, the reason why it's saying Tom is an issue, it says cannot find the name Tom, right? And the reason why is because I got a bit of an error right up here. Because Tom is a new type of person. So Tom, let's do this right. Let Tom is equal to a person. That's how it really is. And Tom says hello. You can see Tom is a person, says hello. Says hello is a method. Take a look what it's doing over here. Same kind of thing. Let's see if it did it actually resolve. It did. Yes. Dollar sign. I'll be okay. Dollar sign curly brace. That's what it is. Dollar sign curly brace. So yeah, so it's dollar sign curly brace. This is not this. It's dollar sign curly. Now take a look what the effect is going to be for dollar sign curly brace. Let me just make sure that should translate, and it doesn't. Oh yeah, because it's ECMAScript 6, so it's exactly like this. I wonder if I know before it had different kinds of exporting. You could export the actual code over here, report GitHub issue. You can add shortcuts. You can choose different themes and all kinds of stuff. This is all new in ECMAScript 2015. You can also specify the type up here in your playground. For example, I can say that I want ECMAScript 5. And when I do that, it transfers everything to the old way of doing JavaScript. And now if you notice, my name plus says hello is the old way of doing it. And notice we use this ugly person.prototype functionality, which is the old way of doing classes, because they didn't have class names in ECMAScript 5. So this is pretty cool. We can config to target any version of JavaScript, even ECMAScript 3, right, as an example. Or ECMAScript 2020. We can do that too and see what that looks like. Right? So it's pretty good. So a really good little tool I recommend to look at. You can do something in TypeScript on the left, and you can do things in JavaScript on the right. Let's leave it at ECMAScript 5 because I think it's a better way of looking at it to see the complexity. Pretty cool. And notice this. Look, what is this? What's this? Come on. What is that? It's an IFI, right? So whenever we did a class back in the day, we used an IFI for the class. We started off like this, right? And we put our class definition in here. The person, the first person class that had this attached to it was our constructor. This is the equivalent to the constructor. And then person.prototype says hello. That means that, hey, I want to add to the person class says hello, the says hello function, which, like you saw before, is an anonymous function. That's how it works out. Okay, so that's kind of the way it works. And from an inheritance perspective, this is how inheritance works in TypeScript really quickly. Let's suppose I have an object of type student, right? I can say that class student extends person, right? And this is, you've seen extends before. Where have we seen extends? Java, right? We see Java, it extends, this is thing, and I can say constructor, and I can pass in public name, right, which is string. I can put in a public age, which is a number. And I can also have a public student ID, which is also a string. And then let's put some curly braces in here. And then it's going to error out because because it's a constructor and I'm inheriting from type person, I need to call the super constructor, right? So let's do that. So we'll say super, and then pass in name and age. And what this does is it satisfies the constructor. And let's say I have another thing that I can do. So I can have, instead of says hello, Tom, we'll make a student called Tom, and he studies, all right? So we'll say studies, or is studying. Notice I don't have to put the function keyword because it's a method. Is studying, and it's returning void. And I'm going to say that console.log, and then backtick, 2 backticks, $, curly brace, name is studying, right? Okay, cool. So I did this, and then instead of making Tom a person, we'll make him a student. If I can type student, there we go. Oh. And same thing with person, student. And we'll also assign a student ID, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, let's just say. And not only can Tom say hello now, but Tom, and by the way, I think we can move this middle bar here over, I'm not sure. Tom can also study. Tom is studying, right? So Tom can do both things because he's a student. Now take a look at this insanity over here on the right, guys. I invite you to take a look at this insanity, right? Take a look. So I'm gonna zoom out the page so you can see it better. So this is the old way we did inheritance with JavaScript. All this, which one's easier, this or all of this? Yeah, so this is why it makes JavaScript easier, and TypeScript is something we're going to be talking about briefly in the last part of semester. And I'll tell you why, because all front-end frameworks nowadays, React and Angular, especially Angular because it's supported by Google and Microsoft, they use TypeScript. So anything you want to learn, if you want to become a full stack developer, we talked about last week, becoming a mean stack developer, you have to know Mongo, Express, Angular, and Node. Well, Angular is that other component. Mern, Mongo, Express, React, and Node. You have to know React. All of them use TypeScript. And which is why? Because it makes it like super easy like this. It looks nice. Here, not so nice. Now, I have to say, I have to be fair, and I'm using a configuration that's ECMAScript 5. The latest configuration, if I want to do the same thing, is ECMAScript 2015, let's say. That's kind of the most common one. And you can see ECMAScript 2015 does make this easier. It does. It works very nicely, and it looks almost identical to TypeScript. So we're in a point where we can start using a lot of the features that TypeScript uses in ECMAScript 2015 and the latest versions of ECMAScript. Eventually, I don't believe we're going to need TypeScript anymore. TypeScript is a middle step to give us modern JavaScript, and I think it's going to go away. But not anytime soon, because they keep on adding new features. And there's some stuff that TypeScript has that JavaScript still doesn't have. Lots of stuff, okay? So that's TypeScript in a nutshell, very, very high level. So when I hover over this, going back to my digression here, when I hover over this and it says any, I want you to think why. VS Code is made for TypeScript. It's made for us to use TypeScript and get good hinting. And why TypeScript? Because if it translates, when you convert it to regular JavaScript, if it converts into something that ignores all my types, well, why even do it? Code hinting is the answer. I want those red underlines when I make a mistake. I want something that says, I don't know what this is. I don't know what this is. I don't know what style is. If H2 is an any, then style shouldn't make any sense, right? I want that. I want to tell me that. I want my editor to tell me something is wrong, and it's not telling me that right now. Okay, so we did a little bit of event listening and event handling, and if you look at the PowerPoint, we talked about how event listening and event handling works. I'm just going to skip through this to talk about. There's a little bit of a diagram I want to look at with you. We're going to end with a diagram. The PowerPoint again is for you, right? So if you think about this, there is a little bit of a life cycle. The user makes an action. He clicks or he or she hovers on something. And then it generates a request, sends the request to the server, responds. The server responds with some kind of changes to the HTML page, right? And what we have for JavaScript to work is something called an event queue, right? So JavaScript uses almost like, it's still a single-threaded application, but we have something called an event queue that is separate from the main thread, right? So whenever I have an event, notice my events, even though I only call them once, I only describe my events once, they keep on triggering forever. Once I attach an event to an element, it's there for life until I unattach it. I can attach it with add event listener, and I can remove it with remove event listener, right? And I have to be very specific. I have to include the entire event that I want to remove. Why? Because I could have multiple instances of the same event that I'm listening for, and that whole function is the event signature. The whole function. So I have to kind of like remove event listener, and I got to tell it what to remove, right? So it's kind of interesting. So why would I remove event listener? Because it's cleanup, right? Event listeners, what they do is they take up memory. And sometimes in a page, I want to have an event listener working, and then, when I'm done with it, I can remove it, and it's removed from memory. It's removed from the event queue. I'm not going to listen for this anymore, is what's happening, okay? So that's events in a nutshell. I'm not going to go further now. Let's put this up on GitHub, because tomorrow we're going to continue with this example as we do more DOM manipulation and event handling. Okay, so we're also going to be talking about GitHub. I'm also going to be talking about your Lab 1 in detail. I'm going to record that so you know everything that I require for your Lab 1 tomorrow. All right, so here's my stuff. And just like before, whenever I do GitHub, and I'm going to show you this really quickly, first I got to go up to my GitHub repo or my GitHub account. For us, my GitHub account is GitHub/Durham Programmer, right? This is where we have it. I have a couple of things from lesson 2A, 2A and 2A2. That's from the other class. Let's make one for us. We're going to make 2B. I go here, and whenever I add a repository, the process is I call it something like WEBD6201, and then it's going to be W2020, and then lesson 2B. When I do that, it generates a little space, a little container for me that's empty. I need to do this stuff for me to make it work, for me to connect, right? Now, there's a couple things that that you can use. Now, right now, I'm only using command line, but tomorrow we're going to be talking about a couple of other tools we can use, all right? For now, I just want to do some of this stuff. So I'm going to go back to Visual Studio Code, VS Code, Control backtick. I want to open up a new terminal window, and I'm going to do the following. Git init, git add dot, git commit -m, initial commit. I gotta wait. I'm a little bit faster than my things. Okay, -m means message, and initial commit is a convention that we use. You can use initial commit or first commit. Those are the two things you can do. You can call it whatever you want, but that's convention. Press enter, and it's going to make a commit. What is a commit? In your own words? Well, what does it mean? What is a commit? I initialize my repository, and then I add all the files by git add dot, and then I make a commit. What's a commit? How about you? See, try it out. It's like a snapshot. Yeah. So I take my files, take a snapshot, almost like a little picture of my files in that particular case, and I want you to remember this thing. And what are the 3 reasons why I use Git? I'm going to ask you this question tomorrow. What are the 3 reasons why I use Git in GitHub tomorrow? I talked about that last week. What are the 3 reasons? Backup, right? Collaboration, which is what you said, right? And version control. Those are the 3 reasons why we use Git in GitHub, right? So right now, the commands I put in place, which is git init, initialize my Git repository, which creates an empty .git folder. Git add dot adds everything to the staging area. A staging area is just before I'm ready to take a snapshot. I kind of indicate which files I want to add. You can remove stuff from the staging area too. Oh, I didn't feel like adding that one. I want to remove those ones, or I want to add new ones. And when I add things to the staging area, that is the grouping of files that I want to make a commit. My commit has 2 parts to it. It creates a snapshot, and it adds a friendly message that I can use to identify the snapshot, which is the commit message, in this case, initial commit. Okay, now, because going back up to here, I just need my last 2 lines of code. I'm going to explain these tomorrow. I'm going to copy these. I'm going to right-click here, and I'm going to paste them in, and it's going to send everything to my GitHub repo. How's this going to happen? Sending is pushing. I'm going to push everything to my GitHub repo. And we're going to talk about the structure of Git and GitHub tomorrow, right? When I go back up here, if I refresh, you're going to see now that we have our GitHub repo with all the stuff we did today. So if you wanted to follow the video later on again, you can see that I have this link. I'm also going to take this link really quickly. I'm going to go back to Durham DC Connect, and I'm going to add this as an additional link. So here's my GitHub lesson 2 repo, right? And open that as an external source. So you can have that just in case you don't know where you're at for tomorrow. We can add that in, and you're good to go. All right. At the end of today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up the video link. But remember, even if I don't, it doesn't matter. Why doesn't it matter? If you go to course resources, right, and if you look, there is YouTube playlist. And if I click on this, you can see that I have 3 videos right now, right? Here is this one. Here is this one, and this one I'm actually live doing right now with you, right? So these are the 3 videos. And so I really don't have to list my videos more than once. I did it for the first video, but if you go to that course resources, you're going to see this link, and you can follow along with the videos. So if you have any questions, it's just in order, the stuff we talked about today. Okay, so that is the stuff that we're working with. There we go. Okay, any questions around the stuff we covered today? So we did a review of last week's stuff. We covered everything from how to use VS Code, how to use Emmet, which is a shortcut for HTML, how to install things with Yarn. We added Bootstrap, and we added jQuery, and we added Font Awesome, and we created a very simple navigation system, and we added Jumbotron. We did all that stuff that we did last week, and we did a little bit of DOM manipulation because we added in our code, we added in a little bit of this secondary header, which is an H2 that we dynamically added to the page or programmatically added to the page with DOM manipulation from last week, right? So we talked about that. And then we discussed in our VS Code how to code stuff. So we actually went through, we did the code piece, and we talked about event handlers and event listeners. Event listeners listen for a type of event, and event handlers respond when the event is raised. It does something. And we talked about 2 types of event handlers. One that was inline, anonymous function, and the other one that's a name function that you can use like this. Okay. We also talked about scope a little bit because we had to. When we pulled the event handlers out of our event listeners, right, and they didn't become inline anymore, they became name events, then if I didn't have this let in here, suddenly we couldn't do our mouse over and mouse out because we were out of scope, right? However, when we put the let h2 in here, it worked, but we also noticed that it is of type any, and type any doesn't have any meaning for us, and that's why we didn't get any code hinting here. Whew, lots of stuff we covered today. More stuff tomorrow. That's it for me today. Remember, take a look at your description of your lab 1. I'll be covering that tomorrow, and again, it'll be due next week, next Friday at midnight. Okay, that's it for me today. I'm just going to stop recording.